This cake is for a 6-year-old birthday party. She just loves Wednesday Addams, and so we're going to be making this cake. Let me tell you how I did it. So first of all, I started by mixing up my cake batter and mixed it up so I could put it into my cake pans. I have a double layer 9-inch tier, and then I have a double layer 6-inch tier on top of that for this cake. You see me adding the batter into some greased pans so I can bake them. Here's my cakes all finished in the oven, getting ready to pull them out. You see I leveled them off. This is after I had them in the refrigerator chilling a bit. I'm going to add the first cake to the cake board, adding a little bit of buttercream to keep it there so it doesn't roll away from me as I'm decorating. And I'm just going to do my first crumb coat. I'm going to do my crumb coat for this first tier. Added my second layer onto this cake. And now I'm doing the crumb coat on the sides of this tier. Got that pretty much covered up here at this point. Just trying to smooth it up a little bit so that when I do put the colored icing on, it's nice and smooth. I'm pulling some of that excess icing from the sides into the center to get a bit more of a crisp edge on the sides. And now I'm beginning to stack my 6-inch tier. Going to do my crumb coat, and here I am beginning to add some of that purple color that the little girl just loved so much. I'm just taking my spatula and adding a little bit to each of the sides and also to the top, and I'm using a bench scraper here to smooth up my sides. Now, one thing I can say is this is the first time that I'm doing a tiered cake, and I made a lot of errors in this, and I learned a lot of lessons, so might have time to talk about that in a little bit. So you'll notice as I'm doing this that I do put some supports into this bottom layer, but I do not put dowels in it, and I also did not put a cake board between the two tiers, which does prove to be problematic as I'm moving through the process of decorating this cake. I was so bothered by the fact that there was a bit of sagging that I ended up making it a second time. But again, I made some errors, and ultimately I ended up using the first cake, this one that I'm making here in this video, to give to the person who wanted this cake. So learned a lot of lessons, and this is the very first tiered cake that I made. So I think it was a good learning opportunity, and from that I learned some new skills, and I'll be doing things differently moving forward. So here I am now adding the purple icing to that top tier. I tried to make it a smidge lighter. Didn't go much lighter, but I did want it to go a little bit lighter. And now I'm scraping off some of that to smooth out the sides of this cake to make it nice and smooth and crisp. I'm going to put this into the refrigerator for a little bit for it to chill. Well, I did, and I have it now on a cake board, which ultimately I ended up removing, which I'm not quite sure why I did that, but it did contribute to some of the mistakes that I had in this cake. But again, lessons learned, and I know better for next time. And here I am after the cake being a little bit chilled. I'm trying to smooth this cake out a bit more to make it a bit more smooth on the sides and top of the cake. I've taken some of that excess icing that was along the edges on the top, and I'm just scraping them away and trying to get a nice clean edge at the top of this cake as best I can. And I think that's pretty good here looking. About to start the next part of the cake. So here it is. As you can see, I do put this cake down onto the top of the bottom tier, and I did neglect to put any kind of dowel between the two, which ultimately proved my downfall. I'm filling in along the edges between the two cakes with a little bit of excess icing, and I'm going to chill this a little bit again so I can then clean up the way that looks on the two tiers. In hindsight, I wish I would have put this cake more into the center, but I wanted to give myself a little bit of a place to put some of the decorations for this cake in the front. But then, as you'll notice, it will start to sag towards the back of this cake. This is me just trying to clean this up a little bit now that the cake has been cooled a little bit, chilled down. All right, now I'm beginning to create some of the decorations that are going to be on this cake. This is an Addams family themed cake. I'm using some black fondant here. Just kind of using a rolling pin and rolling it out a bit. Get it nice and smooth on the back of that. I'm creating some trees and some bats, and I believe I use an owl, and I'm using a tombstone, several different elements made out of black fondant, using these molds. And I'm just taking a little knife here, and on this particular mold there was a face on the front of the tree, so I'm using a knife to smooth over that face, and then to create the lines in what would look like the tree to get that face out of it. I'm going to do the same thing with the second tree. I do believe I used 2 on this cake, and this is going to be a purple background with these black fondant elements, decorations in more of a silhouette kind of appearance. Here I am making a little owl that will be put onto one of the tree branches, and now I'm making a little black cat which will be put on the cake as well. This right here is the house that's going to be at the front on the top tier. And then I will, in a little bit, I'll use some yellow fondant to put into the windows to make it look like there's some lights on in this silhouette house. See, I needed to add a little bit more fondant because it wasn't quite enough to cover the whole house. And I'm just pressing down so I can get the indentations from that mold to transfer onto the fondant. And I'm going to cut this out using a little knife. Get all that excess fondant off the edges. Here I am trying to get some of the white powdered sugar off of the fondant, and I'm using a little bit of Crisco to rub onto that. It'll make the tree a little bit more shiny. It looks really shiny when it first finishes, but then ultimately that does absorb into the fondant, and it just makes it look a little bit more sharp as opposed to the dull color that happens from it being put into the powdered sugar. And I do that for most of my decorations. If you see the white sugar, this is me making the hand for the little it fella, and again I'll use that Crisco to, there he is, I'll use the Crisco to clean that up as well. Here I'm beginning to make the tombstone that will be included at the front of the cake as well. In hindsight, I would have made this a bit thinner. I used a candy mold instead of a fondant mold, so it is quite thick. Just any weight that I could have taken off of this cake, I think would have been helpful in preventing some of that sagging that does ultimately end up happening. There, I was just kind of trying to smooth the back of that off. And there we have my tombstone. Here's where I'm adding those yellow pieces of fondant to the house. I'm using just a knife to kind of push the fondant into that, and then at the end of this I'll use a little bit of water, to kind of a very tiny bit of water on my finger to rub it so that some of the water gets underneath the yellow and holds it into place on the cake. Here I'm cutting out what will be the graveyard gate. I am going to cut the center part of this out. So it's just kind of like the outer part of the gate, so that I can put the cat in between there. Now I'm beginning to add the elements to the cake. You can already start to see the cake is starting to sag here in this image, but if you take note where it is now, you'll see as it moves forward that it sags a bit more even before this video will even end. Now you see that I've added the tree, I have the house, I have the tombstone. I started to add some of the grass on the top of the cake. I have it on it, and I'm really just kind of using some piping gel to hold those things into place. I'm putting it onto the back of each of the elements and then sticking it to the cake where just hold it into place. Here you can see that the cake has started to sag a little bit more. This was a good lesson, a bunch of lessons learned from this cake. And I think it was at this point that I started to notice that it was beginning to to sink a bit in the back. I also added at the top there, you can see that I made some realistic looking stones. I added them to the right behind that gate. I also added a moon and a bat that you may have seen there on the left side of the cake. And here's what it looked like at the end. You can see that back is even a little bit lower. As I mentioned, I did end up making a second cake pretty much exactly like this, but it also had some element problems, and that was because I didn't put my supports in the bottom cake far enough apart, so it wasn't wide enough base. So there's definitely some lessons learned here. I really enjoyed making this cake until I started to realize all the problems I was having, but I'm really thankful I had the opportunity to do this. So I really appreciate folks coming to watch this video, and if you did enjoy it, I do encourage you to subscribe and watch some other videos as I'm learning this process on my own just from doing it. It's really been great. So feel free to come back, like, subscribe, and feel free to share. I would love to have more people come and even provide some pointers as I'm learning how to do custom cake designs. I will say that the little girl just loved this cake, and I was just told today that a week later she is still talking about this cake. She loves it so much. So it was well worth it, and I'm glad I had the opportunity to do it. And here's a picture at the party itself with the topper with Wednesday, where it says happy birthday, and with the candles. So thank you so much for joining me. Feel free to like, comment, share, and come back again.